Guys, I'm really excited to have Laura here with us today. I got in touch with her after I had shared just some of our fun journey of having CPS called on us, and she reached out. And if you haven't had this happen to you yet, you might in the future, because I thought that this would never happen to me, and it did. And same story with Laura. And so she's going to share a little bit of her story today. And then I'm really excited about all the things that she's done on the back end of that and how she's really put things into place to make some change in our schools. So Laura, tell us about your family, about yourself, a little bit about your story, and then
Okay.
how you get into this.
Okay, good. Well, thank you first for having me, Laura. I'm really excited to be here. We have a new organization I founded called Facts for Safe Families, and it's working on behalf of adoptive and foster families and families with kids of complex trauma to better educate, inform, and support both the families and then school personnel or any outside treatment personnel that they might be working with. I've joined the Council for One Chance Illinois, which works on behalf of kids with unique abilities. And I am also the founder of Sequoia Family Ministries at our church, which is an adoption support group for families. Again, providing education. We have speakers, resources, things like that. So been very, very busy. But first and foremost, I'm a mom of four. I have four amazing, beautiful girls, ages 31 down to 17. And we affectionately call them Batch 1 and Batch 2. Batch 2 were adopted internationally, and they both have special needs. So it's kind of what's led me to this whole journey for Act 3 of my life, maybe. But yeah, I'll go into a little bit of our story. As you know, children from complex trauma, have medical histories that we aren't aware of. And sometimes their behaviors and emotions are very, complex and difficult to understand. And I've always been a really big believer in outside support. I don't think we can do our job without a village. We need everybody, right? We have OTs, PTs, therapists. I think one time I counted on one hand, maybe like 17 people that I had to contact, on a weekly basis between both girls and just outside help, school people. So, it's a lot, right? But I'm focused primarily now on the dynamic of school social work, primarily because of the environment that they work in. They meet one-on-one with their children alone in a room, and they have a lot of, deference, their opinion at a school. A lot of times now, especially with social emotional needs, teachers defer to them. Other school personnel defer to them. So their opinion is so important. And they're working with our fragile and vulnerable kids. And if there's not adequate understanding, and what we found with our experience and research was that there's just loopholes overall in the way school social work is done. And that can put an environment in that's not supportive of our kids and really not safe for our families. So a little bit of our story. I'm take a little drink here. So, we had, like I said, raised a set of girls already. We were going back in our 40s for our kids, and one has a paralyzed right arm and hand. And, we were always working with different outside treatment professionals and always had a great relationship with them. But our world was turned upside down in high school. We had an experience where I'd called an academic meeting, and instead of working on strategies to support my daughter, I found out that they had called DCFS on me. And I was accused of being an emotionally abusive mother, too controlling, and unsafe for my child to come home with me. Luckily, I had a wonderful DCFS caseworker who called me from the school. And when he heard the whole story, he just said, "I don't even know why I'm here." So I, had a very good ending, but it was so shocking, especially the circumstances and, my family was shocked. Everybody was shocked. No one could believe it. It was just so vastly different of opinion of us and our family than what the reality was. So, I really wanted to explore that. I started searching for answers and figuring out why did this happen to me. I've always loved and cared for my kids. Our community knows that, so I was trying to figure out what went wrong. And we came across a lot of loopholes in school social work and the way it's done. With our kids, they're so vulnerable. They've gone through really hard things. It's not always easy for school personnel to really understand what the reality is. They only see one side of the story. They only see one piece of the picture. And if parents aren't included in those cases, it's hard for them to really know what's going on. We have information that they don't have, and we see things that they don't have. I'm sure you've had that experience too.
Yes, we have. And I learned that it just takes one curious adult in the school. It doesn't have to be your child's teacher or anybody who's really working with your kid on a regular basis. It can be anybody, and they observe one thing and they're like, oh, he must come from an abusive home. Let me call CPS, because that's what they're trained to do. They see one thing and they're calling CPS, and whatever story they make up is what CPS gets.
Yes, exactly. And, the thing is that they have good intentions, right? But the problem with adoption and foster care in particular is that what these kids need are attachment-based interventions. And we can talk about that later, but attachment is counterintuitive to what a school, especially high school, is doing. They're trying to prepare kids to go off into independence, right? But our kids, aren't necessarily always ready for those situations. And, inadvertently, they can roll back years and years of attachment bonding that we are trying to create with our children. So we need to have everybody on the same page. We need to have, everybody working as a team with a shared vision, and that's, and I don't fault schools at all. I mean, that is what a high school tries to do. And for a neurotypical kid, that works. But our kids are sometimes way behind emotionally, developmentally, and they're just not ready for that, and to promote to a child that they need their parents, that they need their guidance, it's almost really the opposite of what schools are doing right now. So, we're trying to take the latest brain research and the latest information and strategies and now provide that to, teachers and support personnel, really any caregiver. Because like you said, it could be even a babysitter, it could be anybody, and they don't recognize what they're seeing. So that's what we're doing. So one of the things that we, through the research, there's so much to it that we put together a PowerPoint presentation that talks about those loopholes in school social work. So if you'd like to see that, we can start, or if you have any questions first.
No, I think that's perfect. And for those who are listening, she's going to share her PowerPoint, and I'll put it up on the YouTube channel. If you didn't know we had that, we have a YouTube channel, and you can watch all of these on YouTube, so you can get a further, more educated training here.
Okay, so
go for it, Laura.
Here we go. Okay, can you see it? Are you good?
I can.
So I call it the 411 on loopholes in school social work provision and oversight. And there's a lot on each slide, but I'll try to just sum it up. So really what we're finding is that school social work has progressed very quickly in the last 5, even really 10 years, but especially the last 5. Mental health care, social work was done by counselors in schools, and the counseling, really wrapped around academics, what they were going to do with their post, secondary, future. And what it's moving into is a lot of the SEL, social emotional learning, really worried about kids' mental health. We do see all the headlines, mental health is a crisis. So we definitely need school social workers. But what I think has happened is that things have moved so rapidly that we haven't been able to catch up with guidelines, safety precautions, procedures, parameters. It's just very loose. So the question I feel like it needs to be answered is, what should mental health care look like in a school setting? They are vital. Social workers are absolutely vital to a child's success at school. I am not here to ever argue that we don't need additional people in our kids' lives. I think, with the right support, all the addition we can have is wonderful. But what's different, we found with school social workers, is that they're really an anomaly. All professionals in a school have some sort of oversight with federal agencies, state agencies, regulatory agencies, joint commissions, coming in and making sure that they are following the guidelines, documenting correctly, things like that. So OTs, PTs, teachers, all of them have that. The only one missing is a school social worker. So it's really just an oversight. Again, I think it's just moved so rapidly. It's something that people aren't even aware of. With the current setup, the way it works is one professional body gives the licensing to a school social work. So in Illinois, where I am, it's the IDFPR, which is the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. They do not have any authority, though, to go into schools and, check to see what's happening. Now, ISB, which is the Illinois State Board of Ed, they can go into schools, and they do that for teachers, but they have no authority or expertise on social work. So no one's checking. And honestly, I've already talked to some stakeholders in it, and I don't even know that people really were aware of this. And the danger is just, you have, mental health care is healthcare, right? And it's being done in a school setting with no checks and balances. A social worker in a clinic or hospital would have those checks and balances. So my question is, why not schools? In our state alone, we have 850 school districts with 2 million school children. I have not checked Texas, but I imagine it's as big or bigger. And there's these things that I think parents aren't aware of. So school social workers are there to obviously work, as a team with parents, with other teachers, and help our kids. But they're also there to make sure that a kid is not being abused. So in some states, social workers are allowed to meet, let's say, I think in Texas, it's 2 times or 20 minutes without consent of a parent or even notification to a parent. And that is to make sure that if a child is being abused, they can, know that, right? Emergency situations, so important. In Illinois, up till just recently, it was actually 8 times for 90 minutes. We have a state that really does believe strongly in school social work. I also do, so I, don't have any problem with that. But now they just changed it to 12 hours. So that means we have a school social worker meeting 12 hours with a child without consent or notification of a parent. Well, I don't know about you, but if I'm picking a doctor or someone, I look at their credentials. I want to know what their training is. I want to know if they're a good fit for my child and the family. And I feel like 12 hours is a lot of therapy time without a parent knowing. But fine, that's, how our state's set up. But then we have to also talk about, well, how is it set up, right? What are the, if we're not going to do consent right away, then what are the goals? What are they keeping progress notes? Is there documentation? Do they have the right information on our child? I mean, there's so many unknowns. And again, as we talked about, they're only seeing one piece of the picture. So I feel like this, again, is another loophole that we need to have, established guidelines, parameters. We need to know the credentials. If you go to a school website, often they might list who the school social workers are. Sometimes there's even a picture. Rarely are the credentials there, their training, anything for a parent to know. And, I think all parents have trust in doctors and situations, the more information they know. So that's something, we found. So my goal with Facts for Safe Families is to work on behalf of these kids and families and try to close these loopholes. Just like in clinics and hospitals, I feel that school social workers need checks and balances. Another loophole we found is that in a complaint process, oftentimes parents, if they do have issues, might call a school, might email a school, but unfortunately, those don't leave a paper trail. You'd have to file what's called a formal legal grievance. You can do it on your own. You don't need a lawyer to do it, but it is an extra step. It is, extra attention on your family, trying to, you might be interviewed, and it triggers a quote unquote an investigation. But this investigation is done by the school. It is not done by an outside entity. And, I'm a reading tutor. I go into kids' homes. I used to be a substitute teacher. So I like to use teacher, phrases whenever I can. And I feel like this is a little like we don't let our kids grade their own tests. You need an outside neutral body to really be able to come in and say, let's examine what's going on and let's see what's happening. So again, another loophole.
It's really disturbing.
Well, and for kids with disabilities, who are most vulnerable, fragile, they have, again, emotions and behaviors that aren't easily understood. It can be harmful. It can be really harmful.
One of the things, because the fun fact is that we've actually had CPS called on us twice. Once was for my daughter, who was, she was in second grade, but she's more like on a 3-year-old level, right? So she's picking up food off the floor and taking food from other people's plates. She came with a lunch to school, but she's eating everybody else's lunch, right? So she's in the SPED department. She's struggling, right? However, a teacher sees this, and of course, we're not feeding her. We must be neglecting her. And so CPS comes out, does an investigation, yada, yada. And the next time around, my older son, who has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and he has a lot of anger issues. And we had an incident where he punched a hole through the glass in the front door, and it scared me. Like, that's scary to have your kids so out of control that you're trying to figure out what to do and how to keep everybody else safe and all of those things, right? So we called and reached out to a lady who's supposedly on our team. And she's the one helping provide services for our kids. And I was like, I just don't know what to do. I feel like we've reached a new level, and I don't feel like anybody knows what's happening. Like, I go to professionals and everybody's like, I don't know. I've never seen this before, which is always the best thing to hear. And sadly, I think all too common a thing when you have a kid with FASD. All this to say, her go-to plan was to call CPS, and thinking that they could help with resources. And I'm like, they don't do that. But then you don't really want to argue too much on people calling CPS, because I'm like, I have nothing to hide. So this caseworker came out, and she's been a social worker for like decades. And I'm trying to explain that he has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And she's like, what's that? What's that? And I'm like, you work in the foster care system. 70% of the kids in the foster care system have this. Like, what in the world? How do you not know about this? And we're talking about trauma, and she's not trauma informed at all, has no idea, no training, nothing. And so I think about that lady giving guidance to my kids when they're struggling in school and dealing with different situations. I mean, God love her. I'm sure she's doing the best she can and whatever, but I'm like, she's not qualified to be going into people's homes and determining whether or not their condition is taken away, right?
Well, and that's a danger. Our kids will present themselves differently in school than they will at home. almost 90% of the time, maybe 100%. I mean, it's been proven, kids with attachment disorder. And by the way, you made a key point. Schools will tell you that they're trauma informed, right? And trauma, we all who've been, schooled in it, we're talking about ACE scores, violence in the home, poverty, all those things can affect a child. However, attachment trauma is different, and you can't deal with it in the same way. Attachment trauma requires steering a child to trust their parents, right? To get guidance from their parents. And if you don't have that understanding, these DCFS calls, they're harmful to families. I mean, I don't know about you, but our family was in shock. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever forget that day. It even, threw our children off, right? Because they're like, why would they call? Why would, you count on the adults to do some discernment and it's very, that's the other thing we found with mandatory reporting, reasonable suspicion. Well, what is that, right? There's very little training around that. And it's just complicated. It's complicated. And, this is the problem with mental health care, right? Because it's fluid, it's complex. There's a lot of pieces. And again, that's why I feel like, we're really looking at having to do a lot more training for schools on adoption and foster care. I mean, really in the last, if anybody was trained even more than 5 years ago, they don't have the latest info. We have found that through and through. So, and we can talk about that some more. And then another point on my slide is that, families from lower socioeconomic situations, families of color, they are disproportionately affected by these things. And, I'm very cognizant that we were able to, change things for my daughter. We sent her to a private school. Their philosophy there is that if they're not working on behalf of the whole family, they're not working on behalf of the child, right? Totally different circumstance. My daughter has flourished in that school. She has been able to, not even need social work minutes. I mean, from after about the first month, it was like been a complete change. So, again, we need to make that happen though for everyone and for all schools. So let's move on. Yes. So again, parents need to have trust. And until we really answer the question of what healthcare looks like, mental health care looks like in a school, it's going to be, we're going to run into situations like this where families aren't supported. I'm really concerned about it from the fact of vulnerable children. One Chance Illinois that I'm going to be a part of works on behalf of kids with unique abilities. And a lot of times these kids who are on, 504s or have some sort of a medical need also are seeing a social worker. And they have very complex situations. So, if a parent isn't consulted, if attachment-based interventions, aren't used, things can go haywire pretty quick. So one of the things that I did put together on my own, Facts for Safe Families, is working with, like I said, all stakeholders. Our goal is to just change the game, in Illinois and try to get maybe some legislation passed that tighten, what the role is of a school social worker, how it's done, how it's supervised. But until then, districts can really implement on their own, some sort of a guideline themselves. So for our district, I put together the Family Bill of Rights for safety and medical and healthcare treatment, and for medical and mental health care treatment. Thank you. And it's a way to get them looking at what's missing. It's a starting point. I don't expect that the school's just gonna, sign on to everything that I've done, but we're hoping that they can really look at it and critically examine it. And then again, going back to a teacher, it's simple math. I feel like kids do better with the addition of people in their family that can support them, but not the subtraction of the people who are the most important, which are the parents. So that's pretty much, where we're at with that. Again, I feel that we are working, to, just drive the conversation and build awareness. It's just so important, that we're all being able to talk about these things. One of the things we're doing on Facts for Safe Families is trying to remove the stigma of talking about this, right? Yeah. Parents don't want to talk about their kids' mental health care. They are ashamed, when you first find out DCFS has called on you. I'm sure your first, impression is like, oh my gosh, why is this happening? You're so embarrassed. You're so ashamed. And I'd love to be able to take away that from parents and say, no, this is your real life experience, so let's talk about those things. Let's see what we can do to make change. And if we don't know your story, we can't fix it, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really what's driven me, as I've gone through and learned about all this. I thought, wow, this is something that really needs to be changed. So, that's kind of what I'm doing. So it's, I'm kind of trying to build what wasn't there for me, right? The Sequoia Family Ministry is, we started with 6 families. Now we're up to 24 families, which is so exciting. And we get once a month in person and then once a month virtually. And we have speakers that come and speak. We cover, books. We we do check-ins to see what people are experiencing and what's going on. And that's, been really wonderful. It's been really exciting to start to, put forth an education resource guide. We just finished it, and it's called Facts, which FACT stands for Foster and Adopted, let me see if I can get it, Children Teaching Supports. So FACTS, and the first one that we're doing is for teachers, support personnel, and caregivers. So that's the first resource that we've put together. We plan to do more for parents, for, as things evolve, we hear more stories, what people need, we can take this information and build it out, for others. But that to me was the starting point and the priority. We really, kids spend 80% of their time at school, and then they come home, and it's just, like I said, so important that we're all on the same page. I don't know if you found that experience too.
Oh, hands down. And I think that equipping our teachers, like the number one way to go. Mm-hmm. Like action steps, if mamas, if you're listening, you're thinking, okay, great, there's a big problem. What do I do? I think grabbing this resource that she has with the little trainings for teachers and just that education piece. And if there's something in there that doesn't cover your child's specific needs, write a letter to the teachers, attach it to that, give it to them at the meet the house or meet the teacher at the open house, whatever happens at the beginning of the year. Hand it to the teachers and say, hey, I would love for you to read over this. It'll just explain my kiddo a little bit more to you. I think I shared on the Honestly Adoption podcast that we create little booklets every year that tell all about FASD, because in my experience, nobody knows about it, right? Yeah, they don't know how to handle it. They don't know the effects. They don't know anything about it. And so we do a little letter of like, hey, here's where they came from. Here's their story. This is our journey. Because what I've learned is that they're going to make up stories, right? Mm-hmm. And I want them to be informed stories so that they're not creating us to be this monstrous family that's
well, and that's the thing about it, right? So attachment trauma, the difference is that it involved their primary caregiver. There was a break in the attachment. And it also can be that there was prenatal stress, or there was orphanage care, or all sorts of things that affect them bonding to a primary caregiver. So then we come along as the adoptive moms, we have these big hearts and we want to change it for them. And, I've just found adoption adoptive and foster families to be ones of great hope, right? We wouldn't do it if we didn't believe in that. And, we want to fix it for them. And you just can't, like you said, they're going to say, complain about the mom and they're the disciplinarian. They're the, one that mom wants to attach, and the child had a break in the attachment. So they're going to fight that attachment. All of that's so counterintuitive to what schools would see from neurotypical kids. So yes, if people want to go to my website, we will make that available free for parents. The difference, so our guide compared to others, because trust me, I've tried to find so many others online. They are sometimes 80-page documents, or almost too simple, a one-page document where it really doesn't apply at all to your situation. So we needed kind of something that was an overview. So what we talk about is, the overview of what attachment trauma is and how it's different from other types of trauma. Then we talk about what to expect and just kind of some bullet points for what behaviors or conditions, they might see with a child like that. And then we do have a little section on how to help. And again, it's counterintuitive to a school, especially middle schools and high schools, to want to involve parents, but that is exactly what these children need. We need that communication back and forth with those school personnel. And then we have a section that it has 3 questions for the provider, caregiver, whoever's working with your child to ask themselves, because we don't all have the right answers, right? None of us do. I think parents are definitely the experts and have probably more information than anybody. But again, we're all human. None of us have it all right. But you can ask yourself the right questions, which are things like, what's been your experience and training and background? Do you really understand what this emotion and behavior is? Do I have a great understanding of attachment and what attachment interventions are? And if we can get those school personnel to ask those questions, because if the answer's no, that they don't, then the parent, we can provide, like you said, supplemental information for them. Oh, here's a book, here's another packet, or here's something about my child that, you might need. But until we kind of get them questioning, which is hard, right? They have gone through a lot of training. Some of our, sometimes it's an LCSW who's seeing the child in a school. And LCSW, can diagnose and treat, which is wonderful for a clinical setting. But if you're in a school and you're only getting one side of the story, it's very difficult to diagnose and treat. So again, that's kind of, it's a short packet. It does talk a little bit about reactive attachment disorder. We mention FASD. We don't go into it a lot, but that is something, like you said, in the last 5 years, I think people are starting to clue in on now that, they definitely could. We don't know that they didn't, right? We don't know what their histories are. When we got our children, it was here they are, they had orphanage care. There's some time prior to the orphanage care that we don't know what happened. So we're kind of just looking at the symptoms and then going back and figuring out what happened. And I feel like FASD can be like that too, as well. Are you finding that?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Because most of us don't know. Like, we didn't know mom. We didn't watch her drink, right? So we had to do research on our end to dig in and find police reports and all those things, right, to actually get the information. But when you start looking into FASD and seeing all the things, I make up that it's pretty easy to be like, check, yep, check, and you just keep checking, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is a real option for us, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah. And, and so again, you want to be able to support your child, in your child's case, how beautiful would it have been had that, school personnel or whoever would recognize that and said, oh, you know what? let me do a little bit of checking here. And instead of making a really quick assessment and call, they kind of got a full picture. Because you know what, it's just stressing to a child too, to have your mom called DCFS. I mean, it's just stressing for everybody. So rather than inflict more trauma and pain on an already difficult situation, you know, the other option would be to have, again, a little bit more discernment, understanding, and, you know, hopefully by having, you know, some sort of a packet like this to start a relationship with someone, because again, they have had lots of training and it's hard to have to look at things through a different lens. But I think our kids and certainly our experiences, you know, prove that out. So,
And those kids are worth it. And yeah,
yeah.
I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing and how succinctly you've figured all this out and are sharing it with us as mamas so that we can advocate best for our kids. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And no, it's a wonderful, you know, to be a mama advocate too. And you know, we have the ability through, I think, these opportunity or experiences to look at them as an opportunity to make some change. You know, it's not easy, definitely not fun to go, you know, in public and say, yeah, DCFS was called on me. But, you know, until we really look at all of these situations, they're in the shadows and they can't be solved if they're not exposed, right?
Yeah. And I think that a lot more than we know about or that talk about it have been called. Whenever I talk to our adoption caseworker with our agency, and I called her and said, hey, I just want you to know this is going on. She's like, this is happening to all my families right now. And I'm like, oh, that makes me feel better, right? That because people don't understand trauma, they don't understand all the things. So I'm grateful for what you're doing.
Yeah. And it makes you feel better to know that, right? But
Yeah.
that's a problem. We can't let that continue. Like that's
Absolutely.
not a solution to help, right? That's not a solution for support. And that's where, you know, again, I think that if we can get some, you know, parameters in the way social work is provided for and supervised, we can also fix a lot of that. You know, I mean, it's a double thing. It's, you know, what we can do now as parents is present information and all of that. But I think long-term, what really needs to happen is we do need to look at that piece of the picture really strongly and how is mental health care being provided for in schools, you know, because millions and millions of dollars are being put on these you know, into schools for mental health care. And so again, I feel like social work or counseling started out one way and now it's moving into a bigger piece. But if they're going to delve into family situations and adoption and, you know, adoption is a really private, sensitive subject that involves abandonment, you know, sometimes at birth or going through foster care. And, you know, is that something that should be talked about in a school? I don't know, you know, does it have to do with academics? You know, I think some of these things are best left to outside treatment professionals. But again, you know, until we have kind of, you know, well, what's on the school's responsibility? What's on an outside treatment professional's responsibility? You know, there's just so much gray area right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put all the links to you in our
Wonderful.
notes so that way everybody can find you and
Yeah.
reach out to you or grab the facts sheet and educate their
That'd be great.
people around them. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.